Let's look ahead a little bit. And by the way, again, I just want to apologize to Heat Nation for changing my pick. I got drunk by James Harden's Game 4. I'm not gonna lie, I got drunk by James Harden's Game 4.
They took that personally.
And I make fun of Stephen A. for being a prisoner of the moment all the time. And in that moment, I was wrong. I was wrong. So I will take that L. I think the big takeaway so far in these first two rounds of the playoffs is Jimmy Butler as a superstar. And because he doesn't on a night-to-night basis need to put up insane counting stats, I feel like we collectively in the NBA world, we tend to overlook him a little bit in terms of just how valuable he is once we get to the playoffs. We saw him in 2020 go shot for shot at times with LeBron in the finals. He took that team to the finals. So we are huge Jimmy Butler fans here. I think sometimes we do forget just where he is in the hierarchy of NBA players, and he's elite.
Do you also feel? I was thinking about this earlier today. Do you feel like people forget with him just how good a closer he is? And you saw this firsthand with him in Philly. But his numbers in the last 2 minutes of games, really since he became a star back in Chicago, have always been towards the top of the league. And doesn't that feel like what you need? In the playoffs. I mean, I was thinking before the game today, when I was thinking about who's going to win, I thought it was going to be a closer game, obviously. And my concern, that's what Middleton is for Milwaukee. Yes. Middleton was the guy in the Brooklyn series last year. That's the guy you give the ball with a minute and a half left and say, go figure it out. And that's Jimmy. Boston has that with Jayson, but that's Jimmy in Miami. He's always been that guy. And so does that, whether his counting stats are there, doesn't that mean sort of more when we're talking about just like an elite level playoff superstar, about having somebody who can take over at the end of the game?
Yeah, I did the game with Mark Jones on Thursday in Dallas, and we were talking the night before just about the importance of being able to score in the mid-range during the playoffs. And Mark used the phrase, the mid-range is where the magic happens in the playoffs. And I think there's really some truth to that. And if you look in the last however long you want to keep going back, you obviously need three-point shooting. And with the exception really of the Golden State Warriors, who shoot a lot of threes and put so much pressure on you from the three-point line that it opens up the rim. They actually score a lot of points in the paint and at the rim because they're so good in their movement. They're so good with back cuts, with slips and all that stuff. So with the exception of them, you go down the line and it's like every team has people that operate in the mid-range. Every great team, Drew Holiday, Giannis, whose mid-range numbers have gone up every year, Middleton, Kawhi in Toronto, D-Book and CP in Phoenix, obviously Kevin, and like you just need these guys that can get their shots in the mid-range. And Jimmy's one of those guys. And we also tend to talk about him as a two-way player, but there's a bunch of different advanced metrics for guys, and those generally tend to favor players that rebound the ball a lot. So generally those advanced defensive metrics tend to favor Jokic and Embiid and Giannis because they rebound the ball. I'm not saying Gobert. I'm not saying those guys are not great defensively, but Jimmy sometimes I feel like gets overlooked at how good he is defensively because he's a wing. And those rebound numbers aren't what they are. But when we look at, defensive field goal percentage, when he's guarding a guy, his deflections, his steals, like he's phenomenal on that end of the ball, or that end of the court. We should talk. 2020, these two teams met in the conference finals, and a lot of the core group is the same on both teams. For me, probably the biggest additions would be PJ Tucker for the Heat. His defense, and then for the Celtics, getting Al Horford back, because they didn't have him in 2020. That was with the 76ers. And so I think in this series, because Bam killed the Celtics in 2020, he absolutely eviscerated them. We talked
about it on the show with him.
Yes.
Still sends a note to Tatum every year.
Exactly. But so I think that the two guys that I think that weren't there in 2020 that will have the biggest impact on the series.
I have a question about Miami, which is hard to answer because we don't, we're not talking to him, so we don't have specifics on it right now. But I would argue the other, guy that is an addition who hopefully, if he's healthy, should be able to make an impact is Kyle. and he hasn't been right. He hasn't been right for a lot of the season. And he hasn't been right in these playoffs. But, if he is able to get back, whether it's by game 1 or game 2, whatever it is, and be a semblance of himself, don't you think that's another wrinkle that, could potentially change things in this?
Well, Kyle's not the player that he was in Toronto, which is fine. I still think he can make a big impact on the game. I think more about Kyle and the feistiness and the pettiness and having another version of PJ Tucker out there, having another instigator out there, and then across the court you have Marcus Smart potentially and Kyle matching up, which again just adds an element of drama and intrigue for me when I think about this series. I'd love for Kyle to have some games where he hits 5 or 6 threes, but he hasn't been that for them. He hasn't needed to be that for them.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't expect that.
Are you surprised at all, both in this series and also really in the Brooklyn series, that how good Boston has been defensively without Robert Williams being healthy?
I'm not surprised. Again, you look at their team and they can still trot out 5 guys that can guard multiple positions that all have size. And we've said this before about Marcus. Marcus may be 6'4" or whatever he's listed at. I think I might be a little bit taller than him, but whatever. He plays big. There's that great clip from the game today when Giannis posts him up and tries to spin baseline and he knocks the ball away out of bounds. But he's able to hold his own against bigger players. So really it's just the luxury of their roster. Christian Hoover says Marcus Smart is most underrated player in the league. I would love to have a metric for underrated.
I don't think he's underrated anymore. Not after that.
He's underrated.
He's Defensive Player of the Year. He's not underrated.
The guy won Defensive Player of the Year, and he's like on a massive contract.
Why is Al Horford only good in Boston? Like I understand in Philly. I understand, and obviously
that's not even true, though. That's not true.
No, he was great in Atlanta back in the day, and I understand in Philly why
he was a bad fit in Philly. He's not only good in Boston. A terrible take, Jayson.
I'm phrasing this question wrong.
Jayson, I want you to have this video. I need this video.
That's
Tommy just had a terrible take.
Bad take. But what I will say is, I guess so. I'm going to rephrase this a little bit. Why the fuck did nobody want Al Horford when it didn't work out in Philly? Because nobody did.
Well, it was because of the contract. And so the only team that was willing to facilitate a deal was Oklahoma City, because Sam is a hoarder of first-round picks. So he was able to absolve the contract and then bottom out. And so, or I guess he did bottom out. He traded him for Kemba, which he got a pick back. So it's like just Sam Presti playing chess. It's just Sam Presti playing chess. Because I don't think his value. And again, maybe there was an overreaction to his year in Philly and that contract size that teams were unable to see how valuable he was still. And that's a tendency we all have when we get to a certain age and we have a bad year or an off year, and we're on a bad contract. And, you kind of say, well, the guy's washed. And clearly Al Horford is not washed because he's been phenomenal in these playoffs. Tommy, let's hit real quick tonight's game.